So we compiled 543 studies. And in those studies of all these low carb, high fat diets with these durations of 1 year, 6 months, 6 to 12 years in one particular study done in 2006, there were 0 cases of hypothyroid. So again, I think when the carnivore diet or a low carb diet is getting blamed for low or hypothyroid function, I think there is a disconnect with the understanding of what happens with thyroid hormones and what is considered the new normal. Your thyroid hormones are not just measured in the blood. There's also thyroid hormones in your tissues. And just like when we eat a low carb diet and we start becoming more insulin sensitive, we maybe become more thyroid or T3 sensitive when we are on a low carb diet. Again, I think the symptoms is really important to consider. And if you are eating sufficiently and you are eating sufficient fat on a carnivore diet, and now your energy is tanking or your thyroid markers look imbalanced, I would actually test your cholesterol markers and see if you are even processing the cholesterol well. And then if you are not, so if you end up falling into the lean mass hyperresponder or the LMHR group, you may have other imbalances that are beyond the diet. And the diet itself is now showing you where those imbalances or where you may want to dig deeper. But all the other ranges on this, we agree with. So the TSH, I don't like it to see it above 2.5. And so when it comes to the free T3, we often see it much lower than 3.3 as a functional range within the carnivore space. You'll have to really consider energy levels and how you feel overall on a carnivore diet to determine, what is really working for you. What I do recommend is not going to a thyroid expert that is not versed in the carnivore diet, because then their functional ranges are going to be completely different. And especially if you're taking iodine, so you'll see a reduction in free T3, then your TSH might go up because of your iodine intake. And so a standard endocrinologist or somebody that is looking at your thyroid is going to say that you probably need levothyroxine or one of the other synthetic thyroid medications. And I just don't know if that's true. I wanted to show you a couple labs and the context of it so you also understand how to measure iodine. So this is through blood work. You can just go to like a LabCorp or Quest, and it shows that this person's iodine is pretty good. It's 82.8 when the higher range is 92, and this person does take iodine. But many of the interviews I did talked about the weakness of blood levels for iodine. And so here are some of the reasons. One, it's short-term indicator. So when it's in your blood, it's just that you maybe had a surplus of something you're eating, the iodine intake you had, but it's not definitive that it's getting into your tissues. The second one is that iodine is mostly excreted in your urine. So a blood lab test range for iodine is not as sensitive. So again, it may show that there's a surplus in your blood, but it may not be reaching your tissues. And so that's why that urine test is more valuable. So you may be sufficient in your blood, but that does not mean it's sufficient in your thyroid as well as your other tissues and cells that need iodine. The iodine blood work also doesn't show the influence of other halogens. So bromide is another one, so is fluoride. So bromide can hinder the iodine getting into your tissues, even if the iodine looks sufficient in your blood. But this is the periodic table of elements, and they are grouped by the different types of metals or non-metals. So if you see here, this green color is the halogen, which is column 17 right here. And you see that in column 17, that these halogens essentially can compete with each other. So in this section, you'll see fluoride, chloride, which is part of the salt, bromide, iodine, and then there's a few others. But we use fluoride in our waters. We put it in our toothpaste. We use it when we go to the dentist, and people actually pay more for this really toxic substance to basically ensure that we won't get cavities, but it is so not ideal for our health, especially for our children's health. There has been studies that show recently that your IQ will lower by consuming any amounts of fluoride. When you go to the dentist and they ask for fluoride, the answer should be no. There should be no fluoride in your toothpaste, and you should filter your water so that there is no fluoride. Now, it is very hard to find water filtration systems that remove the fluoride, or you can take iodine. And so iodine will replace some of the fluoride that you may be consuming. Chlorine is another one, or chloride. So if you consume salt, that is another way to reduce some of that. And then bromide. Bromide is in everything. It's in some of our foods. It is mostly in our furnitures, our clothes. So when you see clothes that say this is non-flammable, that is where you will see a lot of bromide. So every time you sit on a couch, you breathe in the bromide and then you have an excess amount. So this is where we talk about the halogens and how they all compete with each other. So even if you were consuming some amounts of iodized salt, they will be competing with the fluoride and bromide you are consuming. So just to make this really comprehensive, I'm going to share a little bit about that unrefined salt in case you guys don't go to the links. So table salt is heavily processed in bleach. It contains no trace minerals. It often has flaky residue from oil digging. Yes, that's so gross. And it contains additives such as synthetic iodine, sodium bicarbonate, fluoride, again, fluoride, sugar, anti-caking agents, and aluminum derivatives. Some salts in their ingredient list, you'll see that it has dextrose, which is like that form of sugar. And iodine from table salt is not a good source of iodine. In one of the interviews, or maybe it was Dr. Brownstein's book, but he talks about how a lot of the table salt's iodine evaporates before we even consume it. So yes, we may not be getting goiters or like the big bumps in our necks, but it's not enough to keep us sufficient in our needs for iodine. So unrefined salt is all the other salts. It's the sea salt. It is the pink Himalayan salt. It is all of the other salts. So there's little or no processing. Mostly these unrefined salts are mostly sodium, magnesium, and calcium. Obviously, it's mostly sodium though. It contains 80 plus of the trace minerals such as iron, magnesium, manganese, and zinc. And this is why I like Sole water, and I'll explain that a little bit more soon. And it boosts the creation of digestive enzymes and juices, and it supports the balance of minerals in the body. In Dr. Brownstein's protocol, he recommends when you're taking iodine to also take sodium or salt. And it's because chloride is also part of the same table of elements, and it can help dispel a lot of the bromide and fluoride in your system.